Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Cinema Beyond Entertainment podcast. And today I have two very special guests, Shantanu Yennamadi and Atish Chattopadhyay. They both are sound designers, sound editors. Shantanu and I have been working with each other on and off for more than 6 years.
Yeah.
Right? And Atish, I recently worked with and can say now that we are friends.
That's a good part about work.
Considering I'm a technician, so I've become friends with technicians quite quickly compared to actors and other people. Before we start anything, right, and we go into discussion on sound, I would like both of you to explain what exactly you do.
So, okay, in one line, what I would like to say is that we record, edit, and design sounds. That's the most simplistic way of putting it. And that's my answer.
Satish?
So it's pretty much what he said. If I put it briefly, is first part is to record, get the whole thing, dialogues and whatever else you need, sometimes together, sometimes separately, and then to place them where they need to be according to the edit. So you edit them, and in the end you mix them. In between there are a couple of other things we add, and that's pretty much it. Then it's an export and you hear it.
So just before we started the podcast, you were talking about how you don't. I'm like, the technical term is still sound designer.
Correct.
But you don't do sound. Just put some light on that.
So, I don't like to use the term design is because I don't know if I should say it, but in India, I don't think we get enough time to actually design stuff. It's always we are fighting for time to actually make something, sound aesthetically good or, so, वही मतलब.
Yeah, you can go ahead.
Yeah, so I don't like the term design because I have not worked on many feature films as such as a designer. I work with a designer and I help him with the basic sound edit and create the soundtrack. That's what I do. Yeah. So
I mean, I do agree about getting to actually designing things is something that takes time. And a lot of times we don't really get the chance to it. And also it's because how things work here is to design something, actually you should come in at the point when you're still discussing the script. It's written, the screenplay is drafted. And when you're deciding on how to go about shooting it, from that point, that needs to be included because you're working on transitions. So unless that whole thing is coming in, it's really technically not something that you're designing into the film itself. So what we do bulk of the time is edit things, is both in capacity and in what ends up happening. But yeah, like there is a fair amount of design as in how you interpret the film sonically. So that's there. So it's a bit of a both world.
Explain me the process. The entire sound design or entire pipeline of sound department. Let's say if I'm a producer, I have a script and I'm hiring you. So what is the entire process from pre-production, production to post-production?
Okay, so here I'm going to get into the logistics later. But the initially as process, what it ideally should incorporate is once you have a draft, when you're giving readings to the crew, the other departments, everything together, ideally there should be one copy of the same thing that is with the department of whoever's handling sound as the designer, and it's to gauge the scope of work, what kind of film it is, what kind of temperament, and it helps in everything from deciding what kind of gear to use to record to what kind of logistics are going to be involved, how much time it might take, how much it may cost, everything. So it's really important, in my opinion, that to get the person handling the department on board when you're in your pre. And so at that point of time, generally there is some amount of discussion both in logistic and creative terms that how you're going to interpret the scene, what is written. There are actions and dialogues written. So when it comes to audio and visual, there's like you decide on how you're going to shoot it, the process of it, how it's going to look, what you look at. Some of it at least you decide there. So what you're going to hear is something that you also tend to decide at that point depending on the film and the script. Then comes actually doing it, the recording part of it, the production process. So we go into the location, we record the best possible way that we can. The actors, especially the dialogues, sometimes we record more, but at least the dialogues clearly, legibly, audibly, and in the right tone, texture, whatever we can manage to do that. Then comes you bring all of that back and someone edits it. And like the video is edited, so you have to edit everything together in sound also, following the video edit to make sense of it, how the transitions work, how the cuts work, to even it out so that they sound one continuous thing rather than little pieces of jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah.
And then comes the part where once that is done, you have edited everything together nicely, everything's sitting well, the film is watchable in terms of how the audio thing. And I mean that, like, maybe it's a dispensation that I have because of my capacity, but something that is not edited right in audio, if your dialogues are jumping in level, tone, texture, and they're sounding like those train announcements going up and down, it's not going to be really nice, and it will throw you out of the narrative. So that's actually what drives it, to not ruin the emotion of the scene. So
That's why they say don't watch the first cut ever. Don't show the first cut to anyone.
kind of that's true. And so once that is done, then we get to mixing, where also at this point the music finally arrives, which actually should be in discussion, and some of it should be available in some draft of it, or at least from much earlier when you begin to work with the post. Ideally these two departments should overlap in their work and consult each other in what they're doing, so that they don't end up fighting in the end. And pretty much the practicality of it. And then you mix everything together. It's more than edit is what goes in where, and mix is how much of what. And once it's done, it's like a done dish. Then you put on a nice little garnish
Basically,
of everything.
like production design and cinematography.
Yeah.
So the sound editor will put in all the sounds that are required. A dialogue editor will take all the dialogues that have been recorded on set. He'll edit it as per the picture cut. He'll make, because the dialogue is like the anchor of the film.
Yeah.
Okay, especially when you're doing sync sound. Okay. So if your dialogue is in a good space, everything is sounding fine, it's smooth, then later on you add additional stuff, like you start working on the Foley. You record Foley, वो character का जो sounds है, जो भी movement कर रहा है, all those sounds you record, you add in your sound effects, ambience to create a space. So once you have all these things in place, then you get an idea of how the picture is looking, and then you get into design, you know, how transitions can work better, and you know what certain sounds you add that will, you know, make the mood better of the film and make it more watchable. I don't know, create a better experience for the audience. So once that is done, then you have an idea of the final mix, and you take it to a guy who will mix the film, and he has a fresh perspective basically of how the film is. And because you've been working on it for a long time, the mix engineer looks at all your sounds and all that, and then he will give his final touch to the film and create a final mix.
All right.
And in all this, yeah, we have to work with the director and see that his vision is also incorporated.
All right. So explain me the pre-production process, especially when you are early in the stages and just read the script and you want to know how do you want to go about it. For first example, for doing the sync sound versus doing the pilots. So explain the difference.
I think first we should talk about pre-production. Like if I just get the script, what I will do is first of all read it, and most of the scripts will have some sound cues, right?
Yeah.
Depending on the mood of the character, if he has slammed the door or he has shut it softly or whatever. So you note those things down. You write down all your cues, you know, especially the location, and then how you basically visualize the film and then imagine what kind of sounds, how the soundscape of the film you have to imagine. If you do that at this stage, then you know what kind of sound you have to put in later on when you're actually executing. So you know the palette of sounds that you're going to use, and then you can work towards that, right?
Okay.
Other than like directly in post, you get the film or you'll watch it, and then start. It's a different thing. If you start in pre-production, you have a lot more time to collect your sounds, to record sounds if required, and then you can instruct your production sound mixer ki this area is going to be challenging. If you could record things separately, if you could record some ambience, so all those things, yeah.
And like pretty much that. And then also, in terms of design, that's pretty much it. And also there is something very important that I feel is, I keep mentioning this, that get the person in early. Because there's a difference when I am reading a script in isolation sitting in my room, and when the person who has invested their time, their effort, their ideas into the script long before anyone has ever touched it.
Yeah.
So when they give a reading, like the whole dynamic of it changes, how I interpret it changes. So it's very important, at least to me personally, it's my perspective, that I get a reading from the person concerned if I'm going to design it. What happens is, like, I get the mood of the film, where he is weighing in, because see, there are instances of film, very known films, where entire scenes were a couple of lines, and they have become really like something that any cinema lover still relishes in those films. So when a person is telling me, interpreting the script real time and telling me about it, then the image that forms in my mind is very different from how I can just read it.
Correct.
Like, it's not necessarily right or wrong, but it's just going to be different. I think once that is there, then everyone is a lot more on the same boat, everything's cohesive. And aside from the palette, another thing that really happens is, we think of this, that the film gets edited after we have shot it. Chronologically, when you sit to edit, yes. But a lot of times when you're talking to all the people concerned, especially the person who looks at it, the eye and the ear, because that's all you have to present your film in. You can't say, oh, so-and-so fell in love and it was beautiful. You have to show it in some way.
Yeah.
So when you're trying to do that and you explain these two guys, one is always fiddling for what they can look at, another in terms of what they can hear, and you have your idea that I want to express this emotion, all of three come together, and there will be some amount of problems that you immediately see, that we don't know how exactly to put this on screen. So you iron those things out. Can we do this better? Can we change something? Do we need dialogues? Do we use music? And once these things are planned, your film has a palette to it in terms of design on how it develops organically, rather than just put a song there or put some music there, and your compensation for missed ideas happens a lot in post. It's a better idea to do that get everyone on board. And another thing is, really, please trust your crew. Get a crew that you can trust, at least to the best of your logistics will allow, and have faith in them. Otherwise, don't work with them. Because what the real big problem happens is, unless you're on the same page about, I know this guy is going to give it 200%.
Yeah.
Like, I don't honestly know that much about writing as a writer would know.
Yeah.
So it's very easy for me to think about this. But are they encountering a problem? Because we have to trust each other that we're trying to solve problems. And once we start from there, I think the whole process becomes a lot more cohesive. And then your design automatically translates, because it affects your edit, how you translate those emotions, what kind of pace, how much time do you spend on each thing. Do you show this for a while, or do you compress it to make it something very fast, and just, is it information, or is it almost like some of the books, if you might have read, they have this long elaborate way of describing someone just sitting and looking at a tree, which might be pretty long if as information, but it makes sense there, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's a lot of emotion there. So those things are really important, and this is what happens in pre. I know it's pretty scattered how I talk about it, but this is what the pre is for me.
Yeah, we were talking a lot about knowing your edit beforehand.
Yeah.
So and we had long discussions on it. So please put your point across regarding knowing the edit before you go on set.
I mean, see, on set, one reality of it we must face, and especially when we are younger and we don't have like a huge palette of things or barrage of experience to shower at people to give us a lot of money, is we have to be efficient. We have a X amount of money paid by Y people, and we need to get that thing done. In middle of that, if you want something to translate and be the thing that we have imagined it to be, we need to be efficient. And the way to do is, like, it's very easy to miss things on set because we are not necessarily going chronologically, because that's a bad idea, because logistics of it will keep shifting if you do that, and something that can be done in 2 days becomes a 4-day job. So to avoid that, you're anyway going to break this thing down anatomically and go according to what's most cost effective.
Yeah.
And to do that, one thing that's really necessary is not exact cut points or that the editor can't change, or the film chronology of things happening in a film has to be locked in exactly. That's not my point. But what do I look at? When do I look at it? Why am I looking at this particular point? And do I really need to see this? Like these, and especially the last one, because honestly, do you want to really see a 4-hour long film that could have been made in 2 hours? So I think these are questions that we need to ask before we get to shooting a film, and that's essentially editing out what I'm telling people. It's like having a neatly drafted speech we don't have right now. But if it was much neater, I'm pretty sure it can be concise, to the point, and something that people can easily follow instead of languishing around and thinking, what is going on here? Am I watching this? Why? That should never happen to the audience.
Absolutely. So when you get on board for a movie, how do you figure out the logistic, working with the producer, figuring out budget? Assuming, of course, you first have a discussion with director. Explain that way. First, what is what kind of a meeting are your first meeting with directors?
So the first meeting is actually the director explaining the film in a short, in a summary basically. In a few lines, he'll explain what the film is about. He'll tell what kind of characters are there, the mood of the film, and then that was my personal experience. So then they explain then they go to the logistics ki this is part, I need sync sound over here, I cannot dub, we have to do sync sound because I don't think I'll be able to replicate this thing in a studio.
Yeah.
So that is where your logistics part you start thinking about ki if we have to do sync sound everywhere, then what kind of equipment we need to use, we can't send somebody who's not experienced, we need somebody who's experienced, who's handled such big shoots. It depends on how many characters you have in the film. So all those things, the production part Atish will be able to explain, but I can talk about the post once he's done here.
Yeah, cool. Atish.
Okay, so when generally, especially as a person who's a production sound mixer who's recording on set, when I get into a project, first of course I will talk to the director, and if the designer is already on board, or if it's myself, there is a fair amount of discussion in this process about what we want as the end result. So what that pretty much we covered. Then comes how, and for these it gets a little tech heavy, of course, here, because you're going to choose your equipment according to it, and the equipment vary according to what you need to do. Are we recording in markets? Are we recording in quiet places, in moist hill stations, dry deserts? Your equipment actually changes for that. And also, see, there is a fair amount of extremely expensive equipment involved. So budget does decide what is doable to a certain extent. It's not a guarantee that if all money was no object and you receive everything, you'll still turn up with a great result. That's not what I'm saying. But it's necessary to have certain things in place, and if you cut corners around there, you're cutting what you can possibly do. So everything doesn't need everything. Being wise about it, having information before it is necessary. And for that, one of the first things I really always have started putting my foot down about is please have a Reiki with someone from the department. It may not be the same person, but at least this person knows one-to-one personally for a while. Even they can do it. But please, if possible, personally have an idea of the location. And there are simple things. Say you're recording something in, I'm randomly naming a state, in UP. It's November. And what you can presume is it's marriage season. So every time you pick a location, and what's the scene? Is it a house which is situated in that place? So generally I like to break it down I'm talking logistics only because it comes to cost. I break it down into two things. Are we cheating this place, or is it a real location?
All right.
So if you're cheating a
place means shooting there, saying this is in some other city.
Correct.
Partially that, and partially also nature of the place, because see, and we'll get to it later when you are going into the tech a little more, is noise is not as simple as this is noise and this is dialogue. The kind of noise makes a lot of difference. So say, if getting back to this example that I'll just use so that I'm lucid, is UP में record कर रहा हूँ, and then it is a place which is at least say a small town, and that's where the character stays or is, and at that moment in the script, and is doing whatever they're doing. So what amount of noise comes there is already in the script. I will get away with a lot of it as long as it's legible. On the contrary, I'm showing it's a quiet night, two people, a boy and a girl, are just beginning to get into romance, and we have chose to make it a day for night, or sorry, that's wrong in terms of technical nomenclature. Is essentially we are showing this night scene by covering all the windows and making it night, and we have lit it up nicely. Now, right in the middle of their nice romantic dialogues, there comes honks of bikes, people shouting at each other. There is some 50 people outside because there is something going on. There are a couple of vanities parked outside, so they are curious what is going on. Someone starts playing music, and what you're going to record is never going to fit into the film because that's the wrong kind of information emotionally for the scene. So are we cheating it essentially means that is this time and place real for my script? And a lot of times we get that we are not cheating it, and sometimes we are cheating it. If we are cheating it, you have to be a little more careful about being a silent place, because it's like if you have a white canvas, you can color it to your choice later. If you don't have it, then there is a restriction according to what color is it, into what comes as an output. Your emotional content is going to vary a lot according to what you finally record there. And so once this is figured out, say what season is this, how much of noise, what is the proximity to, say there's a temple or a masjid nearby, and you need to be aware of the fact that do they have a aarti going on from 7 to 9 in the evening? Do they have, if they're going to have prayers 5 times a day, how many times is it falling within my scheduled time? And so can we afford to skip those amount of time, wait for it, because generally they're pretty brief.
Yeah.
So can we just take a break, have a little bit of chill time within those times, have some tea, and then come back and everyone saves the day? Or are we in a situation where it's pretty much of a bad idea? There you can plan your logistics, that are we dubbing it? Can we schedule something which is at least non-dialogue for those amount of time? And this will help a lot. Like planning dialogue scenes which you need to cheat later at night might easily save you both from hiring a different location, and you still get to shoot where you are shooting, and you still get to record your dialogues in sync, because two people actually interacting with each other in physical proximity is very different from putting people in a dub room where they have a headphone on, they have to stand straight in front of a mic and emote the exact same thing over. It's a little taxing, and it doesn't always come back right. So the performance that the director agrees to looking and hearing at it, that this is right, it will change and become something that may not be right. It can also be better, rare cases, but mostly it's not. So these are things that we try to do in preempt. That's why Reiki. And another few technical things is like, if I'm going into somewhere, say in Rajasthan in peak of summer, or at least you won't be shooting there hopefully in peak of summer, but sometime during the hot season, we need to be a little careful about what kind of equipments we choose, because some equipment will fail once it hits 45 plus degree of direct sun.
Yeah.
If we are going to a hill station in November, certain kind of microphones, beautiful looking and sounding microphones, are going to be terrible choices, because once you hit that kind of moisture, they are going to simply fuzz out and retire for the day. You will have to do certain amount of उसको थोड़ा मरम्मत नहीं, बट उनको थोड़ा प्यार से रखना पड़ेगा ताकि वो फिर से काम करे. So you can't risk that. You will have to choose something else which is apt for that weather, and your batteries are going to function differently, and there's a lot of tech stuff, but overall this is large part of the pre-production from a location recording point of view.
How many times has it been that either of you been on Reiki?
I have been, say, around a good 65 to 70% of the time because I've started to put my foot down about it, but often it happens I don't. It's just still something that in terms of production logistics we are getting used to as a industry. I hope we do better soon.
Yeah, so it's like almost like 40% of the time you are going on location
Blind. Yeah. Flying blind. I just have some information about the weather and some vague information from whichever AD is kind enough to just have a chat with me that this is what we are doing. This is maybe a few phone photographs of the surroundings, and everyone's going to take the photograph of the room. Who's going to click photographs outside the window and the door and go around the mohalla? No one.
Nobody.
Yeah. So this is the stuff that we have to do better.
What's the law of generator? Right.
Tricky one. Law of generator, if you like. I think what Vineet is trying to say is like, how far do you get that thing done? See, honestly, there is...
For example, just to explain it to people, if you're shooting outdoors, you need electricity, and the electricity, the power for electricity comes from generator. Generator makes a lot of noise. Sync sound in the proximity of generator is NG. Not good at all. So what's the law of generator? Where do you keep it?
I mean, I like to have it, like, people might laugh at me, even professionals, but I'd like to have it around 500 meters away. They generally gets to midway of that, but you can get away with a lot less in very specific situations. I'm not encouraging you to keep it closer, but see, use it as a standing instruction that place it as far as you possibly can. Without any technical problem. People grumbling is not a technical problem. There is, to my limited knowledge, not much of a generation loss if the cable is long. It might risk
Electricians say there is.
I mean, just few hundred, like something that's traveling at 11 lakh feet per second, I don't think too much. But but jokes apart, see, we are always taking jibes at each other while walking, but the part is this, that you're trying to preserve the sanctity of the performance. No one's more important than the actor's performance, not even the actor. That's my viewpoint, at least, from just that space between an action and a cut.
Yeah.
So if the generator is present, more likely than not, you have an object going all through it.
Yeah.
So why do it? Just take the effort it takes. Like, you wouldn't have someone dancing around in your frame because you can move them in rotoscopy later on, right? So pretty much the same logic. Like, if it's movable, please do. I understand sometimes there are going to be situations where it's a little difficult because of how people are and how the place is and this and that, but try to keep it as far as you possibly can.
What other challenges do you face when you're doing sync sound?
See, it's plenty, and I can go on for hours maybe, but two of the things I would really like to mention, actually maybe more than
something that young filmmakers need to be aware of.
There are 2-3 things. First of all, to the directors, it's my first question, and I've got a mixed response about this being asked, is why are you choosing sync sound? Because, I'm going to annoy the crap out of you. Keep quiet, don't overlap with dialogues, don't do this, don't do that, mics need to be on the characters. But why do we take so much of hassle? It's an aesthetic choice to preserve the performance. That's where I'm coming from. I'm only going to do this so that the performance that the actor gives for so and so take, whatever the number, is exactly what you preserve after you're done editing with your film. And the thing is, like, if it's an aesthetic choice that you want this thing, this performance, that's the reason you're choosing sync sound. Not because it's cheaper or more expensive, not because it's cool, not because it's popular. That's the main reason we are choosing sync sound, right? So be clear about that. And if you need it, then you need it. And if certain things are needed for it, we will have to do it. Second is discipline, which is, I think, as personally, in my experience, is a big thing working in India, is no one's doing anyone a favor by staying out of frame. No one's doing anyone a favor by being quiet about quiet at the set in between that little time from action to cut. The dinner plans, the next shot ka planning, even say sometimes things like, say, if the focus is a little loud, no one from the monitor needs to say focus, because the focus puller is well aware, if it's gone, you're going to do it over anyway. So I think it's really bad discipline to think that my opinion or expression at the moment is more important than the performance that we are recording.
Yeah.
So being quiet on set is a non-negotiable for me. If there is a cue for the actor, please try to make it a visual cue. If not possible, prompt, sharp, monosyllables, and never on dialogue. And in terms of money, let me put it in very, very simple terms that make sense to everyone. Aapko, whatever you want, you are spending that amount that day, no matter if you use one take or 100, because you're paying this person for the time and they're trying to record it. If you go back with high fidelity noise, the problem is not sound departments. The problem is that as a crew, we don't have the discipline and the courtesy to just keep quiet, which is part of our job. And not doing that is a problem. So this is one of the biggest problems in India, that we somehow just don't know how to keep our mouth shut just for that brief amount of time. So these are, I might sound a little angsty, but these are the main problems.
But those are the problems that are the most important to address,
Yeah.
especially when you go on set, like, because that's something that I have experienced on all the sets that I have been on. We were talking about pre-production and budgeting. As a sound designer, when you go on board, how do you budget it for the entire film? What all includes when you say I'm budgeting this picture for sound?
So the production budget is obviously per day budget, whatever equipment is required. That's very clear. Whatever, and it depends on the recordist, how experienced he is. He will have his own charges, and his team, basically, if he's using one assistant or two assistants, depending on that, and of course the equipment, that whatever they've chosen. Now when it comes to post, so first of all, the genre of the film, if it's very action heavy, sound design heavy, or it's a drama or romance, it depends on that. Once you have an idea of how the film is going to be finally, then you can basically, because you have experience, you can judge how much time it's going to take in the edit. And depending on that, you have to, first of all, you have to budget for your team, your dialogue editor, your sound editor, and your mix engineer. These are the three main people involved, and of course your Foley. And so so these are the components that are required, and these have to be done by different people. They are all working parallelly. So first is your team, you budget for your team, and then the space that you're going to use, where you're going to do your sound editing, you're going to do your pre-mixing.
So you're talking about studio.
Yeah, the studio. So one is your, here in Bombay, we work in smaller rooms initially when we're ideating or, initially putting in the sounds and, creating the soundtrack. So first you'll be spending a lot more time in these spaces, in the smaller spaces. So you budget for them, and then finally you try to create your final soundtrack in that space, and get your previews done, get everything done. So you have to think about how much time you're going to take, and as per that, budget your small studio ka rents, everything. And then finally, when it comes to the mixing room, you consult with your mixing engineer ki kitna time lagega and all that, and then that's how it works.
So when you go into final mix, how do I put it? Depending on whether you're doing 5.1, 7.1 or Atmos, how much of the work of laying down the tracks, premixes, how much of that change based on what's the output that you're getting?
So if it's already planned if it's Atmos, then see, actually the amount of time that's going to be taken is not very different. If you know that this film is going to be Atmos, just you have to see that when you're track laying or basically sound editing, that if you have a studio, a premix room which is Atmos enabled, then it'll save you a lot of time, because then you can already place your tracks as per the format, right? Rather than going to the mix, which is mix room, and then doing it. So you save a lot of money over there.
Okay.
Money and time. So if it's planned beforehand, then it's not going to take you a lot of time. It's not going to be a lot of difference. And the budget is almost the same, because now most of the mix rooms have Atmos. So,
Yeah, but not all theaters have Atmos.
not all theaters don't have Atmos, but if you are creating a Atmos soundtrack, mostly rest of the outputs, the 7.1, 5.1 stereos, they are generally down mixes of Atmos.
Okay.
So it's not a separate.
So once you create an Atmos, then you can downscale it and then put it out to theaters that don't have Atmos.
Only thing you'll have to do is if you're planning for OTT, then it's a like.
Tell me, how did that work in terms of mixing? Because if you're mixing for theater, then what sound you're hearing. You can try to reach out to that level of sound, even talking to distributors and exhibitors, that put the level at 5, put the level at 4, so that what I've mixed, you can hear that
it's translated
theater.
properly.
Exactly. But at OTT, I can be listening to it at my JBL soundbar or shitty earphone.
So you can't change how the audience is going to. So at what level, or they are going to just mute it and see the subtitles. So you can't control that.
What I'm asking is that how do you even compensate or keep that thing in mind while you're mixing it?
Yeah, you have to, because first of all, smaller speakers, they are not full range speakers. That either headphones or phone speaker or whatever. So you have to see. That if you use low ends, a lot of heavy, low frequency sound, they won't translate on smaller speakers, and it'll ruin your levels. Because most of the OTT platforms have a set technical specifications, that your levels cannot go beyond a certain point.
Yeah.
So you have to keep that in mind. And that's why I say that when you're working on dialogue, you see that when you're editing itself, you have a close look at your metering, basically, on your audio software. You see that you're not hitting those levels, and because later on they're going to be pulled down, right?
Yeah.
When the final mix is happening, he has to deliver it as per the specification.
Yeah.
So initially, if you put in so much sound and you make it very loud and all, ultimately it's going to be pulled down. So keep those things in mind. Where it's going to be monitored, who's going to listen to it, and all those things. So yeah.
And in this part, it's just like two things here. One was how to budget it. So वहाँ से चालू हुआ था, और OTT में how to get into it. They very relevant things together. One is when it comes to Atmos and how to design for it, one thing to remember is, and at least to my knowledge, the rooms that are Atmos enabled are going to charge you more.
Yeah.
Very definitely. At least when you are using the Atmos.
Not much actually.
Not much per hour, but over say around 460 hours, that little much is going to build a lot. And especially if you're trying to make a film where you have just scrambled enough budget to make the film finally, those amounts matter. So plan again, have a plan that am I going to use it or not. Second thing is,
does your movie demand Atmos or not?
Demand, I think, like if you, even for a very quiet, simple dialogue drama, I can do more with Atmos. I can make it more real if I have to concise it. That's what I would say. There is a scope for using it. There's like, you can, since there is a ceiling height, like there is a height angle to it, and without getting too much into what all, because it's just too long, but like just be clear about those decisions. Have a discussion with the sound guy that are you going to do it or are you going to skip it. Second is one more thing about doing it in Atmos is like, see, it's a new beast, but don't get scared or overwhelmed by it.
It's not a beast.
I think it's quite a beast. Like for the right films, it does wonders.
So one point is that it's a misconception ki if this film requires Atmos, you can do any film in Atmos. It'll only make the sound make it sound better.
I know, of course. When I'm saying like, does it demand Atmos in a sense, like, is it something that you have to have? I'm like, can your movie not work without? I mean, it's like saying, this picture this is for an OTT. This movie is good. I'm like, every single movie is for theater.
And one more thing is that it involves the same amount of work. If you're making it 5.171 Atmos, Atmos has a little more extra. But
like for mix guys, it will have definitely more work.
If you look at the deliverables and all that, it takes a little more work.
But you know what? Except for a couple of Nolan films or very high budget action films, I don't have the ears like you two guys have, but I hardly notice Atmos.
See, that is the thing, because a lot of times how we use Atmos is not supposed to make you realize that there is something above. What is happening is, say we are talking, three of us, if we are listening to it here live, a part of my voice reflects off the ceiling and comes back. and it gives me this sense of
Height.
how far back or front I am. It adds to that feeling.
Correct.
So what happens is, because of how, and also Atmos is not just about having speakers on top. There is one look, let me get into the tech a little. It will help you have discrete sounds, single sounds, or say one particular sound go around top or anywhere around the thing in a very say a pinpoint focus all around the theater. That is sometimes very useful for us.
Basically, better resolution.
Not just resolution, how you put it, because there's a basic difference in how the Atmos functions as an object, because there are these object tracks where you can have singular sounds or many singular sounds going around differently in the same thing. 5.1, when you say it, say if you imagine a theater, there are 3 speakers behind a screen, and your entire right wall and left wall is essentially one wall is one speaker, which is essentially an array.
Yeah.
So when you're moving something, say from screen front right to your front side, or say for a 7.1 I'm explaining. So when you are explaining, we are going to the right side or right rear, the right surround or right rear. What is happening is that that one sound is spread over that entire array.
Yeah.
It is very different in Atmos, that it will actually calculate that how fast it travels and pan it across those speakers individually, and a ratio between them when you're panning it. So that effect is like it's a discrete sound that is going past you. While with the other thing, it's a bed. It's an array of speaker which acts like one. So essentially there is a difference of loudness with the same sound in front one speaker and this entire array. What it can do according to accuracy of objects, placement in the soundscape is very different. And when you use that judiciously, you can achieve a lot in terms of how you attract and distract, which is a part of one of the most crucial tools in design, a person's attention who is watching it. And another thing about Atmos is like, see, if a plane flies overhead, you're going to realize it. If it's Nolan, its ship is sinking, water is going up, you can realize it. But say something made locally and dialogue drama, and I've been part of it. And the one thing that I've always watched it in both Atmos and non-Atmos situations, and the first difference is it's less real, because there is a lot more happening, which is not, it's like salt. You are not going to sense it unless it's too much. It doesn't mean it's not there. Turn the Atmos off and listen to it, you will sense the difference.
Maybe.
And it doesn't mean that if there are speakers, itna speakers hai to udhar sound dalna.
That's a different debate altogether.
Yeah.
But another thing that I would also say is like, if it's this new thing that's stopping you from making a film, that's completely nonsense. A film made in 5.1 is a better film than a film not made in Atmos.
Many people still think that 5.1 is a better format.
Yeah. I'm like
That it's a tighter sounding mix and not.
For some reasons, all the movies, I'm like, especially that I have been part of, have gone abroad for distribution. They only ask for 5.1 for some reason. I don't know why.
It depends on the theater, what kind of screens they're getting, what kind of licenses they're getting.
Most probably that. Yeah. A segue that we are talking about Atmos. I'm like, Rear Window would have been an awesome movie in Atmos.
Which one?
Rear Window. From the flat above.
I mean, yeah, because
another flat that we did not see in the movie might have a character.
And not just that, like I'm not really fond of placing sounds behind me unless it's a certain kind, because ultimately, like someone whom he mentored me almost when I started working initially, and there's something very important he told me. There are 2 exit signs at either side of the screen. If someone manages to look at them while the film is playing, your film is gone.
Yeah.
So my job is partially, not totality of it, to drag the audience inside the screen, and placing things randomly at whim, because in real situations it will be behind me. To place it behind me or above me is utterly pointless in my humble opinion. So what I genuinely think is like, but it would make a difference. How? Because he has this vast space in front of him. And at that point of time, they were working in, I think, 4 tracks or 16 tracks at the most. I think 4 tracks because it was tape. So, the kind of things or the kind of sounds, the soundscapes, like say a film like, I think Roma or plenty of films which are modern day films, which are dialogue dramas or essentially dramas, used in the soundscape that we use. It would have been a different creative choice, but again, it is a wonderful film to watch how it is.
So those creative choices based on the kind of movie you are making, the narrative. So how do you go about that in terms of designing an actual film? Creatively, working with directors on post, like you've recorded, you've done your dialogue, and now you're sitting there with your director and designing the film.
So generally how it happens is we get a film from the editor, and they'll have their so the director has worked with the editor, right? And he will have put some sounds that he wants, and that will be there in the pilot. When you're listening to the film for the first time, you'll listen to it, whatever the editor has put, all the sounds, whatever dialogue, everything. First you watch it like that, and you build up an idea of how, you know, what all things you want to change. Then you have a discussion with the director ki what does he have in mind, you know, specific choices ki ye sequence design hoga, either music hoga, this will be a montage, whatever.
I think another thing in this regard is how to design. I think one of the most crucial aspects of design, and this I find very interesting because I learned, it's one of the last things I started to learn, I'm still learning it, is there is this thing that when we watch a film, we don't really watch it in installments. At least we shouldn't, I believe. So when we are watching something over a 2-hour period, things, how they sound, their proximity to me, what the characters are doing, and everything changes from their absolute realism. It's a cinematic space, so we are at liberty to change certain things. So I will give an example. In a film I was working on, it was that the dialogues according to the normal way of functioning was pretty clean. But the designer kept insisting we have to dub this scene, and he is not a person who likes to dub.
Okay.
But then when I watched it later, what he has done with the scene, that part of it came it was a 8-reel movie, so it's 18 to 20 minutes, and it came at the 6th reel. So what happens is, once you get to the later part of a film, everything comes together, there is a lot of music, this, that, and drama building up, it gets louder. So it needs to have that moment of breathing space. It was kind of a departure between the protagonist and the girlfriend, in absence of a better word. And so what the thing is, like, there are cars passing right by them, but it's quiet as a whisper. You can feel them, but you can't hear them. And that completely changed the emotion of the scene. So design is a lot to do with that, how you interpret a real soundscape and make it cinematic. Correct. What you use can be exaggerated, downplayed, and it's not at whim. There is a method to this madness. I think that's the most crucial part of design, and that's what we work actually as a designer. That's the bulk of what we are trying to chase, or as an editor, as an FX editor especially, a lot of times that's what I'm trying to chase is, do I make it larger than life? Do I make it something that is subdued by nature? Is the ambience something that is going to be very real? Generally that's, for the most parts, in the initial part I try to keep it as real as possible, and then deviate away. And it's like wherever the film is going, if it's getting angsty, I'll try to select a palette which will reflect that. If it's getting dreamy, I will try to reflect that, and there are tips and tricks how to go there. But the main thing is to chase the movie, because it's like, what do I pay attention to here? What's important? Who is important? Why is it important? And just continuously at each instance chase it, and within the graph of where the film is from the start at this point. So that's, to me, that's the main aspect of designing a film. It's not just making interesting cuts and transitions and this and that. So that graph of narrative, like, when I'm telling you a story maybe, and once I've reached the middle point, there's like, sometimes we slow down, sometimes we speed up, sometimes we get louder, sometimes we get soft. That's the narrator's job. So all of these craft together is ultimately a narrator telling you a story. And if they are not well punctuated, someone who doesn't know how to use their commas or apostrophes and whatnot, so it will just be like like no one likes to listen to a story played back by the automatic reading things in their computer, right? So it will become like that. So that's what I do, I would say, in post. That's bulk of the job.
Any, as you had said previously, like before we started, not without naming names, certain examples that come to your mind where, based on sound, the storytelling aspect was covered mostly due to sound in post, which did not happen while it was in script.
I mean, see, it's a mix and match for both films because everyone involved is human. They're also undergoing their stress and strain and bright sunny days in between, and everything happens. And there are logistical problems, release pressure, this, that. So, long story short, it's a part of every film. Every single film has bits where we have executed it to the heart's content of both the director and ours. And there is always this last one part which actually everyone is trying really hard to make work. Essentially, maybe for whatever reasons, there can be n number of reasons, and it's not really nice to, or okay even to fault that this person's fault or that person's fault, but something has not translated well is how I would like to put it. And we are trying to get to a point where it conveys the emotion properly. So those things, I think there are a lot of times we have our differences, and instances wise without, like, because it's very difficult to name an instance because of this reason that I'm not trying to be just safe. It's just also this thing that it's all over the place. What I can do is that there's this film where this girl is running away after being kept captive. And it was, I think, the third or the fourth film I worked. So I was not very experienced at that point. Fourth film here in Bombay. And so the director, and he is a director who attends the post now and then to see what the effects is like, what this is like, and he has enough experience to listen to them in isolation and take a call about it. That's a rare skill, and I really appreciate that because they differ how it happens. Anyway, so the point is, so instead of getting into what all I have put and what is the problem, he got straight to the point of what he wants to feel. That I want to feel scared. And if this girl is running away and is trying to listen for people who might try to get back and kidnap her again or get her back to the captivity, she's not going to be that focused on things which are right in front of her. She's trying to listen to distant things. And then I look into the screen a little more intently and I see her eyes are always a little away from the ground up, and she's just looking at nothing in particular and running like a mad person. So then essentially he was explaining, like, I'm not telling you the elements, but maybe use some distant dogs, some this, like things that are distant and floats at night and comes to you. And I listened to that and then I thought about it and changed whatever I could. Instead of focusing on the foreground, essentially make the background like a distant sounds a little more something that you play with. And yes, it did completely change how it feels. Like there is this whole mayhem of things coming from very far away, and till the point that she finds a bus and gets into it and she runs away. So like when that finally that bus comes and with in hands of an experienced designer, this was something really nice to experience for me. Is so we barely hear in the final mix, we hear less of the footsteps, less of the rustling, less of her breaths. Is all like mundane but jumbled up things that is floating in information from all around. And then suddenly in the next shot, when finally there's a bus coming, all your attention, whether by pan or the nature of sounds, goes away and focuses at that one distant bus slowly creeping up to you, and she just jumps into and going. So what happens is the audience is traveling with this person's point of view, that they are in flux, and then they focus on something that becomes big, and getting into that is the priority. So it goes away with that. So this way of absorbing the narrative is something that is really important.
How working with directors, like how's the process?
I think my friend here is being a little shy.
What things do you expect when you're sitting with director who's doesn't necessarily is well equipped? Like for example, I consider myself as a very illiterate when it comes to sound. I still am. So if I'm working with you, what are the things you would expect from me?
I would expect the director to know first of all the mood, and how we can basically improve the audience's experience, what kind of sounds we can use, and have at least, if not the particular sound, what kind of elements to use, at least the mood, as he explained, what kind of mood he wants. And he should know what is the potential of sound, what's using sound design, how you can improve the overall experience of the film. So yeah, that's mainly that. Yeah.
Do directors sit with you for long hours, or do they let you work and then come back? And
yeah, that's what happens. So generally they would let me work. They'll not come in initially. When I get the first cut, I'll work on it, at least finish a reel or two, and then they would come and look at it, and then they'll give their ideas of what kind of sounds they were looking at, or how you can enhance some. So I would appreciate that there's that to and fro happening from the director, that they give their opinion, and it's not just like I want music and dialogues. Many a times it is for them, they don't even consider ki sound is a factor, and that it has a role in the film. They think it's just dialogue and music.
Okay.
So yeah, if the director has a sense of how sound can improve the overall film, that is appreciated.
As a sound designer, what kind of feedback you appreciate the most, either from the director or the producer?
What kind of feedback?
Like, is there a specific feedback that you're looking for? Specific way of giving a feedback?
That the mood is not getting conveyed, that is the
emotions.
Yeah, emotion, mood, and overall the story is not getting conveyed. That it's getting too distracting. You've used too many sounds. Maybe you can minimize and use only that is required. Whatever is required. Yeah, that kind of feedback is very.
Working with composers.
We'll come to that. Actually, it's like always both of them to and fro, either together or back to back. So it also comes from the directors, hence I'm going to overlap a bit. I think when it comes to the directorial point of view, what really affects me in a good way is when I get a feedback into it's a very gut feeling thing, right? Like you're interpreting something that is not written word. So are you feeling the emotion that you want to feel after, and mind you, not starting from the scenes start, after traveling through these amount of time with the film already, and then you are into this scene, are you feeling that? That's something. When it doesn't work, then there are 2-3 ways. One is technicals, like if something's missing obviously from the foreground or the screen, or diegetics as we call it, and or change the nature of something. That is one. Another is the treatment, what kind of sound as a whole, with the dialogue, with the effects, everything it's conveying. Another is, now here comes the music part, is there is a fair amount of music that we use in Indian films. And like you were saying, that dialogue and music are the only two things that get focused on a lot of times. It's true, but I've witnessed plenty of exceptions also. I think where the musician, there is this one thing that sometimes it's my perspective only. It's to speed up the process, we work a lot of things parallelly. But if you think of it, it's a chronological process. We are anticipating a lot of things and we are getting into contingencies. Like, let's put this, maybe we'll use it. If not, we'll take it out. But once you start doing that, 2 different departments or 2 different person with 2 different perspective and briefs and communication from various people. Someone's making music at one place, I am making my soundscape at one place. They individually both say something. But then there is a bit of a Pavlov's thing there, and a bit of Pudovkin there. Is what happens is this, that putting a plate and then a person's face can say that he is hungry. And a bit that how we are trained is there are certain things in music which automatically generates certain kind of archetypical emotion. I'm not sure that's the right English, but that, like, there are archetypes in musical genres also, and we establish emotions by that route. So, but when they come together, they may or may not work well. And there are 2 ways to this. One is remain a little bit in touch, and this has to be facilitated. This is one of the things that I really wish production people takes a lot more active stance in, is just making sure the other guy is at certain after every certain duration is aware of what this guy is up to. So you're not you're not flying blind till the last day when everything comes together in the mix. So like say I'm going to use an example of say certain films, like say in Dunkirk or say in Tron, beautiful examples of how music and where it translates into another sound and where it gets into something that is a musical effects, where it gets into a musical instrument and goes away into another sound, then to dialogue you won't even sense it half the time, it's just flying past. So to build that, I need to know what the other guy is using, right? So instance of say a random cooked up instance is there's this cut where in a chase sequence a bike passes by. So what are you cutting to? An action. What is the action? The bike is passing by. What happens when a bike passes by? There is a large noise which comes close to screen and goes away.
Yeah.
At some point you're going to cut from one to another. What bridges this is it's a match cut, and whenever you do a match cut of some sort, you are going to encounter a sound cut. Essentially those overlapping frames or absence of frames, what bridges is essentially the sound of whether it's a door closing or a bike going. So at this point I end up accentuating the bikes passing. Then the music person indulges in some instrument playing loudly to enhance the passing. And maybe someone who was editing thinks it's a good idea to put some grunt or something falling or some sound to accentuate the cut at when he was working in isolation, and then all of them come together. Now you have a music piece. If you take out that accent, the rest of it following it doesn't work. If you remove the sound, then it's a little bleh because it's a massive screen and huge object passes by and there is no presence of it. And then there is something prominently falling in the screen which the first person has used while editing, and you can't use it because there is already too much. So where do we go? Again, for this cohesion, a little to and fro between these all departments are necessary. So how do you accent things? How do you accentuate things? And so music versus sound is actually a very moot thing in my opinion. It happens sometimes, but it shouldn't, right? Like ultimately we're trying to just sonically grip the audience from their seats and throw them right into the screen. So whatever works. And there I think a little bit of like this, I'm going to admit that I've learned it the hard way, that sometimes you have like as a FX editor, I have worked say enormous hours designing something, and it's a little hard to let go of those effects. It happens.
That's one of the reasons why you shouldn't get into mixing. I think the editor.
It's like that's the reason we segregate it, because the mixing guy is generally there. He's like a jallad. He's going to come there. Kya hai? Mute.
Nahi chahiye.
That objectivity is necessary because it doesn't matter how many hours I've put in or whether I've recorded it with a lot of patience and care and money. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Throw it out. You're better with less trash on the screen or in the speakers than making everyone happy and putting everything. Sometimes it's the music that goes for a toss, cut it out. It's the effects, cut it out. Sometimes the dialogue, cut it out. Sometimes that shot, get rid of it. But so I think that's the thing, like a little bit of humility and an objectivity to what's working best as a viewer is what it should get to.
I think there should be some kind of a spotting session initially, if possible. Like once we have a second or third draft of the edit, if we have the director, the sound designer and the background guy, if they sit together and the director instructs this area, I want to focus on the music, this is the mood, this is the emotion, this is where the film is going. So if we have all those things planned initially, it'll save a lot of time and budget, because there are, for example, I worked on a short film with a designer and we created an entire soundtrack, using different sounds, and it was a black and white film and there were no dialogues.
Oh, okay.
But we didn't ask a question ki, are we going to use sounds or is it entirely going to be music initially? We just we made it sound as real as possible, everything we did. And we didn't have the music as a reference when we were working on it. But then when we went to the final mix, we got the music, and then he took a decision that we are not going to use any sound. It's just going to be music. So imagine how
I will just offer a counter example just so that no one gets too disheartened. Is I was working with another friend, fabulous director. She writes really nice things. So there was this documentary about people who announce in trains, for the trains in Bombay. And it's a nice 3-piece series of films, and it's a wonderful documentary. So since everyone was friends and they were working with some amount of cohesion with each other, one thing that was there, and also the person who was doing the background had sent the music way before we had to finish it.
Okay.
So now started the interesting parts, like say whether it's the title part or certain transitions. There are 2-3 examples I just would like to briefly go over. One is when it starts, the film starts. Now, since the music was there and not a proxy, at least this basic structure of the actual music, the music director later on built on it and made it much nicer. But we had a structure to it, so the editor had cut it on it. So everything on screen, since it's a title sequence, the tempo of it, of all the actions, are somehow with the music, and the cut has gone to and fro a few times. So any motion, like say some a guy who tries to polish shoes, he is tapping something on his box. So all of these translates into the tempo that the music is going, and vice versa. The editor has used shots where the speed of trains passing or people going, and they speed up and they slow down according to how the music is responding. So what that let me do is, there is a pitch now because there is some music. There's a tempo now because there is the tempo to which is edited. So I could literally get the train tracks. Like I used a lot of train that I recorded in Bombay for those locals, and I would pitch up or pitch down the train horns, and it would harmonize with whatever strings he has used. Or say the train is going, and I have managed to get by that time loads of trains passing by. So the clatter of trains passing by on the rails, I'll find one or the other sample and maybe stretch it a little bit or this or that, but sync it exactly to the tempo of what the music is playing. And then the whole thing winds up by where there's this, there's this distinct sound of the train speeding up. The motor goes, there's a whine.
Yeah.
So there is a rise in the music, and what we could manage is to use that whine. And since he and I had gone a few amounts of to and fro, we managed to match the pitch and the duration of that thing, so that the whole train goes there, it pitches up, and the music ends and it fades out, and we see there's a shot of a train getting into Churchgate, and it's slowing down, so the pitch of it actually slows down of that whine. So it's just a lot more interesting as I edit to watch. If we hadn't done this to and fro, it wouldn't happen.
It wouldn't have happened.
And then later in the film, another sense, there's this announcer who is visually challenged, and he narrates his whole experience. And so there are 2 bits which were very interesting. One, there was like he narrates his experience about getting mugged once. So technically, if I go about it, or not so technically, emotionally also, is like if he's narrating a first person incident, it should be his point of view, which is nothing. So the director did choose, she chose to, like, we had a brief word and she chose to leave it blank. It's black screen. And we designed this, whatever is narrating according to that, we designed the soundscape according to it. And mostly I have gotten a very positive feedback about it. We were a little jittery that as a viewing audience, especially on smaller screens, and we always get thrown off by dikhega kya phone mein. But that decision of not having anything there somehow made people actually feel quite intensely about that sequence, what he narrates. And later in that person, in that episode, that person goes and narrates, he sings a song that he had apparently sung when his interview was going on. And so, like how he got the job in the first place. And so he sings a song that came from the location. It had gone to the music director, and he managed to use that same song and compose his music over it, and that became the end title for it.
Wow.
And again, since we were doing this to and fro, I managed to play around a little with the trains and their noises and make it some amount of percussion and some amount of musical instrument-like behavior. So the reason I'm getting into this, maybe I'm a little nostalgic about this, but the whole point is when that to and fro happens, is just magical. Like as an audience, if I am having so much fun making it, I'm sure that somehow that honesty translates into the final thing, that when someone's experiencing it, those little touch of magic or whatever you call it, where something has really worked together well in synergy, that translates to the audience. Their experience is enhanced. So I think this is really necessary when you are coming from how to work with a director or how do I work with the musicians. So I think this is one of the nicest example, though the scope of it was ultimately say not as expensive or large or whatever you try to put it as a feature film.
Yeah.
This till date is one of my fondest memory of working in any project at all, because it's just so nice to work together and come up with something which speaks well.
So music composers, sound designers, please work together.
Yeah, man, just play with each other. It's like
It's not a
become
competition.
kids.
It's not a competition in the
Yeah,
final mix. It's a collaboration.
Yeah.
How many times, and I'm 100% sure with the kind of experience both of you have, based on the amount of web series and films both of you have done, how many times you have end up with sound saving the project instead of designing it?
I mean, I think our friend is really being shy here. He doesn't talk and I'm blabbering on. He is the guy who salvages all the dialogues. Huh? Like we have decided to not take names, but if you look into his IMDb, you will see that there are series after series he has rescued dialogues, and I've seen him do that. But apart from flattering him, let's get to the point of I won't go to the extent. Personally, I know that a lot of times we salvage a lot of things, but I don't think I have the audacity to say I have salvaged a project ever by doing sound for it. Yeah. If it's gone, it's gone. I just don't think I can salvage a film.
See, of course, but when we are on projects and when we are on set, we know these things. Certain angles you don't get while you are shooting. Certain locations, turns out, while you were doing recce, we think that's a perfect location, but when you are shooting, that's the worst location possible.
Correct.
But we still go ahead and do the work. So that in those certain situations, especially when you fucked up your shortlist or you fucked up the performance.
I mean, then from that angle, there are two kinds of salvaging. One is the technical sound part, where we are salvaging against essentially bad quality, not bad quality audio. It's still high fidelity. What I say is bad situations where it's either too much noise or improper for the scene. One thing is you can always dub, but then you have technical difficulties about it. There are scenes which the performance is not something you want to dub. The actors who may or may not respond well to that closed room situation.
Correct.
So there, I mean, even if you look at what kind of softwares we use in terms of audio post-production, a bulk of softwares, a large amount of softwares over time has evolved. Like they're even using artificial intelligence right now for this kind of work.
Machine learning.
Yeah. So essentially it's geared towards salvaging the signal of what you need. So I think it speaks in large volumes about our attitude towards the department as a whole, because there are entire companies whose flagship products are essentially making almost unusable audio usable.
Yeah.
But so that happens regularly. India is noisy, is not going to quieten down, and we have a lack of discipline. No one wears masks, forget keeping quiet during shots. But it sounds disheartening, but I think we do manage to pull that out quite a lot. Aside from that, salvaging scenes, emotional quotient. There is this thing that
especially edits. Sometimes shots don't cut.
Yeah, I mean there is a problem. Then
edits you can save with sound. Yeah.
I mean, somewhat we can. I still am jittery because I can see it, so I think anyone will see it. But
there
distract.
Mostly every time all films have a lot of continuity errors, and you realize it when you're working on the sound edit.
I mean, the simplest problem that I get into is there is this, and if any of us who has been on a set knows कि ये close में कट जाएगा.
Yeah.
अभी it's impossible for a continuity person on set, get me the best of script supervisors, to keep a track of and the actors to re-perform that in the master shot they have performed with something in the right hand or left hand, cigarette in which hand and which dialogue, maybe even that is intrusive. But to keep their acting alive and take every step in continuity of everything in every shot, unless you're doing multicam, that's pointless, and multicam has its own issues. It's not a wise idea to shoot films in multicam. But when you are in this situation and it's already like that, so then what happens is the problem is this, that I'm trying to design and it's place something in the soundscape and it has a loudness and a direction to it apart from anything else. Now once it is loud enough, you're going to notice it, and the direction that it is in is also noticed. Now there is a jump, so my choice becomes to place it as close to center as possible so that you don't sense the jump much, and we cheat. Another sort of problem we get into is I'll give you a very common example, is like right now muzzle flashes are not a problem to deal with in post a lot of times, but there is always going to be that stray one where there is no muzzle flash but his hand action seems like there is a shot. Now what do you do, and is this a hit or a miss? Like, you have put the muzzle flash, great, what does it hit? The bullet has exited, it has to hit something, and you're showing a shot where you have to hear the register the impact somehow because of how it's shot. And there essentially my policy is, at least it's a personal policy, is like distract. Like use a barrage of this, that, whatever you can, like some footsteps, more gun sounds, some stray other people's sound firing off screen, someone screaming, this, that.
Music bada do.
He's being sarcastic. Finally found his voice. But my point is, like, it's a diverse amount of scenes, but whatever I can do to make you look at the character's face and nothing else, that becomes my goal. That becomes my goal.
One of the trickiest situations when I sit on edit is like to make sure that visually I'm looking at actor's face first of all.
I think
See, one thing you cannot save bad act. You cannot do anything about it if it's
bad
performed.
nobody can salvage.
Yeah, but
it.
that was what I was saying. Like, I don't have the audacity to say that I have managed to salvage a scene really, because, I mean, let's face it, man. Like, I have a lot of opinions, some informed, some not so much, but about how and what should need attention on set. But I don't think we can, or any of us in the entire production system, has the capacity to alter someone's performance.
No way.
There's no kind of software that can do that.
Not yet.
Like, that's the human you can't replace in this whole process with no matter how many AIs you get. And another thing is, we keep forgetting them. A good screenwriter, if they have written it well, it will translate with so many goof ups. And there are films where there are things visible which shouldn't be, there are things in audio which shouldn't be, and we get away with it just because it's such a gripping story.
Yeah.
And it's been performed properly.
So my eyes are glued onto his or her eyes. I don't care what is 10 feet behind.
Correct.
So I think this part of it, I like to deal on set. I think that I sometimes give a stray opinion, not directly, but somehow I make it a roundabout way to make it reach to the right person who might be in a mood to listen. Like the pitch at things which are delivered, which has still something to do with my job. Or even whether there are cut points in the scene which are going to be editable, or it's cohesive, it expresses the emotion, and what's on paper is going into screen. I think that part if what is on paper is good and who is carrying that performance is good, the rest will somehow or the other will figure out a way. It's a lot of jugaad.
Take care of itself.
Yeah, because I mean, come on, like, any of you noticed 90s or 80s or 70s ka film when there used to be suddenly one goddamn light on a character when they're giving a big monologue? I mean, if you technically look at it, it's like, kya hai? But come on, man, like, Rajesh Khanna ka shakal mein light to chahiye. At least for that film. So I mean, there is a barrage of things, but I don't have the audacity to say I can replace that ever.
On a lighter note, what are the stereotypes in sound editing, sound designing that you guys still do it? They're stereotypes. Like, for example, one of the stereotypes in movies, especially in sound designing, is every single goddamn door creaks.
Yeah.
Okay, that way.
That way.
I hate door creaks, man. Don't use them. The door,
Thunder.
unless it's important or it's a horror film where the door opens and some shit comes out behind it, please let's stop using it. It just makes me
It
cry.
annoys the hell out of me that in every single movie, door creaks.
It's like if you don't use it, वो director बोलेगा अरे इधर ये door का sound नहीं आ रहा है.
Yeah. I mean, if the door doesn't need a character, don't give it one. Don't make it into a character that it doesn't need to be.
You can give it a character, but yeah, it's not always required.
I mean, if the script demands that this door is something that at one point is going to do something in the script, or there is a reveal, or it's edit point where it needs to have some nature to it, like the character bangs the door and says something like Scott Pilgrim versus the World. He shuts the door and he just gets into somewhere else, like what the hell is going on. You take half a second to realize that it's a different thing altogether. So those kind of transitions, you will need a very smart transition sound. But aside from those character types, door sounds, and what else? Every gunshot has a ricochet. Like that's not how guns function. Let's please.
Lightning, thunder.
Lightning. Like another thing is this is not really a stereotype, but something that I find very funny is using lightning as a cut point thing. No, somehow people forget that there is a difference between the light and the sound mostly.
Yeah.
At least some little bit.
Yeah, but you have to.
And
It
then
always makes the sound exactly the same time when it's on the screen.
mostly we don't, but then sometimes we are caught.
Huh?
Sometimes we are caught in a situation where we have to do it, and like it's cinematic, and some part of me is like, no, dude, it's just we fucked up.
You were saying.
One more thing is Raat Mein Kutta. It has to be there.
यार get rid of kutta crickets whenever you can.
You watch any Indian film, रात का scene है कुत्ता भौंक रहा है.
कुत्ता भौंक रहा है.
I think it's essentially what, but I would like to mention here that stereotypes work. That's why they are so. What the
Not
person,
always, no.
No, not always. Definitely, that's what we are discussing here. But I think what essentially generally people try to do there is to establish a quieter place where distant things are audible. So just like work a little hard and look for something else. A stray baby crying. A car that comes and stops and the door closes and that like of the lock. Like improvise, think of it, and also is like another thing is like, is it really necessary? If not, what is it doing there?
Yeah.
Get rid of it.
Yeah.
Not required.
Not required.
I mean, stereotypes are plenty, but we can go on about this. Like there should be separate episodes about this. We can maybe.
So a lot of people who are listening to this, many of them, I'm assuming, are budding filmmakers. For them, like we have been in those situations. Like for example, I remember when I did my first short film ever, I did the sound myself and I had no knowledge about it. And not only that, but I was not at all humble about not having knowledge about it.
Okay.
Which like took at least 10 days of my work, which should have been done, like if a proper sound designer was on it, might have been able to finish it in a couple of days, 3 days. So somebody who's budding and just getting into it, how would you help them channel their production pipeline so that it helps best for the sound? What are the things they should do, and especially things that they should avoid?
You're saying this is in the post-production phase?
Production, post-production, somebody who's making their first film.
Hire a sound guy.
I mean, like that's
the easiest way of doing it, yeah.
pretty much it. And like how to hire a sound guy is also there. But there are a couple of things that I think looking back at the times when I was working in projects with a lot of firsts, even my firsts, their firsts, a few things in, and this I'm telling to both sides and I keep reminding myself is first of all, let's get to a point which I think I've told this before. Get people you trust, or learn to trust people. Either way, like trust issues ruins projects. Like and we have to all understand that I can't neither have my way all the time, nor do everything by myself. Once we realize that, half the problem disappears itself. Second is plan a little bit. Ask if you don't know something. If both of you don't know something, we'll figure out, ask someone who knows, and that will generally come for no price at all. And just don't go by a bunch of YouTube videos already, including this one, because
that is so important.
Yeah, because it's. I mean, just this is something I really. It has started to affect me a lot, especially because I'm from an institute, and over time, this is something that I really have started to believe in. This, that someone invented the wheel, and then we read about it, not the other way around. So doing things and messing up is the only way you're going to improve. So don't be afraid to mess up. It's all right. And then why did I go to the institute and learn anything, or why learn anything at all? My point is, we are trying not to reinvent the wheel. Like every time someone's being a doctor, they have to become Louis Pasteur first, and then they go around to vaccines. It's like it's a lot of nonsense then. So we try to get rid of what's already done, need not be done again. Don't reinvent the wheel. But the rest of it, I think it's just be prepared to figure out, be prepared to mess up and laugh about it, and it's all right. That biggest of productions there are mess ups every day, and then we are running after each other, getting on each other's nerves, getting on each other's throat sometimes to get it fixed. And another thing, I think this again is a realization, and I would like to share this, is whether you're the sound guy or the camera guy or this guy or this camera girl, or like irrespective of who you are, if I expect that I'm going to get the best script and the best person and the best director right at the start, I think we are being a little entitled there. And same goes for the other thing. Like, you're going to get the best person to do your sound for your first film. If you're lucky, please make good use of it. But we are most likely we are not going to be having that, right? Because who am I and what's my metal that I get the best of everything and then I'm going to work? So a little bit of humility, a little bit of understanding, and carrying load for each other, like not my job and shrugging the shoulder, is not a good attitude to start with. It will come after a point of time when people are taking advantage of your kindness maybe, but that's a long and almost a decade long at least travel. But before that, I think like work together in some amount of camaraderie is what I believe
absolutely
sorts
necessary.
it out.
I'm like the point that you put across. A lot of people also ask me either on Instagram or even on channel the books to read to learn filmmaking and all. And I would like to reiterate, because Atish has very wisely said that mess things up. Like try to do it on your own. Nowadays you have cell phones which record decent footage.
Even us, like after working on so many films also, like when we're actually working, like when we start our work, we have a blank slate, right?
Yeah.
So only when you start putting in sounds, you realize they are not working.
Yeah. Exactly. Like there's no amount of YouTube videos or books that's going to help you to learn anything. Unless
there's no formula, basically.
Yeah, unless and until you don't do it yourself.
It will help you learn things, but it's like if you're already going to swim every day, you can learn a new technique, but not without getting into the water. Like,
absolutely.
It's reading, practice, both hand in hand. You can't do one without the other, and you can't work without people.
Yeah.
Like these are the two most, I think half the problems in this whole industry will disappear. I think it's too much to say at my age and experience, but I honestly do feel so. Like if we just learn to like कि अभी अकेला तो नहीं कर सकता, अगर इनको ही करना है और मेरे साथ करना ही है, and this is what I have right now, I might as well make the best of it. This is not the last thing I'm going to do in the world.
Yeah.
And that immediately solves half the things.
Half the problems. Collaboration.
Yeah.
Collaboration with an open mind. Because ultimately, as I keep saying, filmmaking is 1% creativity, 99% management.
I mean, we might disagree on the ratios, but yeah, matlab.
If you are on set, you know how many, like most of the day you're just problem solving.
Yeah.
Yeah, on set obviously, but then
managing
it has
people.
Its free, so like there has a fair amount of planning.
Yeah. Any parting words? I think this has been 1.5 hours. I thought that we'll be done in 40 minutes, 50 minutes.
Yeah, I've been blabbing, sorry.
I'm sorry that I didn't speak a lot.
I think both of you put your points across quite eloquently. Thank you very much, Shantanu. Thank you very much, Atish, for recording this amidst pandemic. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening. Hopefully, there'll be another podcast, and I'll see you then. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.